Okay, hi. I'm going to look at text 2 now. Text 2 is a prose fiction extract. Um, and when you look at it, you notice that the writer is Thea Astley, and it's an extract from something called A Kindness Cup. Thea Astley was a pretty, she died a while ago, but she was through the, let me think, sort of through the 60s and 70s and maybe into the 80s. Or a bit later, very well-known Australian novelist, prize-winning novelist. I'm only familiar with a little bit of what she's written. There's a famous one called Eucalyptus, which I think I did at uni, one of her books. Anyway, so another Australian text here. The first one was Australian as well. I think maybe there's been a bit of a recent, in the HSC text, a bit of priority on using Australian things, but that's sort of just by the by. Okay, so we have a 5-mark question here, so that indicates that they want us to do a bit more with this than a 3-mark question. And we have quite a bit to look at and things to choose from that we can utilise to form into a nice 5-mark question. So we're going to need several quotations, and we're going to need to say some, perceptive things about them. To answer the question, analyse how the experience of returning home has been shaped by the writer. Okay, now, in an exam, you would read this during your reading time, 10 minutes of reading time, along with everything else. And then you come back to answer it. But let the question give you a bit of a clue. Now, there's a lot of stuff in here which can be read, but then can sort of be ignored. So when I'm reading this again, I'm focused on what the question wants us to do. Analyse how the experience of returning home. Okay, so we need to really narrow in on what this extract has to say about returning home and how language has been used to shape that experience. Okay, remember, it's all text and human experiences, and the particular experience which we're being examined on at the moment to see what we can say about it in an unseen text is the experience of returning home. Okay, something that people have to do in their lives sometimes, and it can be full of different and complex emotions. Okay, so what I would do here in terms of exam strategy is, in my 10 minutes of reading time, I've read it once. And then I'm going to read it quickly again before I try and write a 5-mark response to it. Bearing in mind that a 5-mark response is going to be about a page of writing. Okay, you're given about a page to write this. So if you're going to churn out a page of writing, I think you might as well read it a second time. I think you have to. So the first time you read it in reading time, you can't mark anything on the page because it's reading time. You're not allowed to pick up your pen. But the second time you can. And what I would do is I would read it again, and I would go through and underline anything and everything which is specifically related to the idea of returning home. What he thinks, and it is a he, what he thinks of returning home. And you can leave out a bunch of other stuff. Okay, if there's stuff which is just like how something looks, or what someone else says, or some other irrelevant bit of information, then you can ignore it, because there's plenty of stuff in here which is just totally focused on returning home. Okay, I might be laboring that point a little bit, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through and just read out in a list all the things that I underlined which I think we can relate to the idea of returning home. Okay, now you might want to do the same, or hopefully what you've done is you've already sort of done that because you've had a go at this before you're listening to this video, but maybe you haven't. Actually, I only really said to read it, so no, I haven't expected you to have a go at it yet. So if you've got it in front of you, maybe this is the time to write down a list of possible quotations. This is what I've got. I'm just going to read out the quotations. In order. He hopes. He has not entered for 20 years. Nauseating nostalgia. Kept as far as possible from other passengers. Share the excitement and chatter. Ambitions for solitariness. Grief. Experiencing grief when he supposes rage would be a better thing. Uncertain. One should never go back. One should forgive places. This place has much to be forgiven. Reluctant to. Drabness. It's 20 years, he volunteers, since I've been here. Okay, so there's about 12 things there which are quotations, fairly short quotations for the most part. Oh, excuse me, I'm all itchy. Which can be now utilised into an answer. Okay, so the question says, analyse how the experience of returning home has been shaped by the writer. Well, what I would do here is I would frame my response around the idea that it is an experience for him which is full of ambiguities. Okay, he does not feel all good about it, but he certainly doesn't feel all bad about it. It is complex. I would say that it's ambiguous and it's complex and it's sort of multifaceted, which is sort of a pretentious word that means, you know, there's different things going on. There's different sort of faces to the idea of going back home. Okay, so I think a good quotation to use is "he hopes," which is towards the start. And that is a short sentence by itself at the start of a paragraph, so it stands out for that reason. Now, that sets up a sense of optimism, okay? Because if he's returning home, well, in the ordinary course of things, you'd assume that returning home would come with optimistic feelings, you know, seeing people and seeing places which were important to you, which maybe you haven't seen in a while. Excuse me. A sense of, you know, reuniting with those things, okay? But then this piece of writing sort of oscillates between that optimism and negative feelings, because later on in that paragraph, it's "he has not entered for 20 years." And then at the end of that paragraph, it's "nauseating nostalgia." Now, that would be a good one to quote because, well, it stands out because it's the last two words in the paragraph, but also you've got a little bit of light alliteration there, which I think is deliberate, the N sound, "nauseating nostalgia." But also you've got this, those two words don't normally go together, they clash, okay? Nostalgia is, you know, really meant to be the sort of, you know, this pleasant sort of feeling of a pleasant sort of familiarity with things that are in the past, okay? Something which is sort of comforting from the past, you know. If you have a nostalgic experience, it's like, oh, you know, I just did that thing which I used to do when I was a kid, you know, whatever that is, and it's nice. But nauseating is something that makes one feel sick. So this is a deliberate contrast, and it's just about what you could call a juxtaposition as well, a quite confronting juxtaposition of those two words. So from all of that stuff just in that paragraph, the feelings of returning home are shaped in a way that makes it sort of complex and ambiguous. We don't know if it's good or bad, and there's a bit of mystery around the circumstances of his being away for so long and the circumstances of his wanting to come home now. And this is continued. Like on the boat trip, he keeps as far away from other people, but then he shares their excitement and chatter. He talks about his ambitions for solitariness, but then he goes and has a conversation with the girl working in the cafe or tea shop, I think. I think it's a tea shop or something at the end. And he's ambiguous in his own emotions and feelings. About halfway through, it says he marvels that he is experiencing grief when he supposes rage would be a better thing. Well, the ambiguity is still there. You know, what's the grief about? Now, we can only assume that something happened in this place to him 20 years ago that made him want to leave, something traumatic, something unpleasant. And he is reliving that grief as he sails back into town. Although he could be feeling rage, he says. He should be angry at something, perhaps the same thing that caused him the grief. And so he's got all this sort of like self-doubt about the appropriate emotions for the occasion. So the overall idea in answering this is that the experiences are ambiguous, which means that it's not clear exactly what they are, but also that they are complex, because there's more than one thing going on and things that are actually working against each other. So that quote about grief and rage there would be good for that. He sort of says some philosophical things as well. You know, one should never go back, and one should forgive places as much as people. Now, there's some borderline personification in there as well, because, you know, literally speaking, a place can't really cause, you know, a place really can't be forgiven. I mean, a town has no agency to inflict any pain upon anyone. It's the people who are in it that might do that. But this idea of having to forgive a place to be able to move on sort of gives a human quality to the place he's returning to. And so that's a complex sort of you know, feeling or thought to have about a town, isn't it? Now, throughout, the town itself is sort of described in low-key, unpleasant sort of words. Like he's walking, where's a good example of that? Like it's steaming, it's baking. It's not just hot, but it's baking. There's sort of a sense of like the hot desolation there, I suppose. There is a description of it as drab, or at least the hotel he would be going to is drab, and and there's words like tired and stink and narrow and spotted. Sort of like this is a place that time has forgot. It's just a bit decrepit and falling apart. And it's probably the sort of town that people move out of, and the population's declined, and young people in particular don't want to be there, etc., etc. Excuse me. And then there's sort of like a sting at the end of this. He walks in and he tries to he talks to his first person, and he walks into the tea shop and says to the girl, it's 20 years he volunteers. Just that word there, volunteers, instead of he says. We sort of, there's sort of this feeling that he's like trying to be positive, like he's volunteering this information about himself. He wants to talk to someone new. He wants to maybe start healing in a way, right? By having a positive approach to interactions in this place, which is full of unsaid, unspecified grief. It's been 20 years he volunteers since I've been here. And then she deals. This is kind of funny, actually. She deals savagely with the counter. This is a girl who's wiping up in the shop, and crashes the glass jars of sweets to one side. And then at the end, lucky you, she says. Very, sarcastically, very ironically. So she's obviously trapped in the town, and it's like, it's lucky you've been away for so long, she says. So the overall ambiguity with this is, well, something happened to him in this town 20 years ago, and it made him stay away for that long. And the town itself is portrayed in sort of low-key, unpleasant descriptions. And so why does he want to come back at all? Okay, but there's this idea that he has to come back. He's compelled to come back in order to confront his past, and in order to be able to come to terms with things, in order to have closure. Not that we know what it is. It's not important. In order to heal is the best word I can come up with. And I didn't mention the first line of this. Dorothy submits to this pull of fate. Okay, he's fated to come back. He's compelled to come back to deal with things that have happened to him in the past. Okay, so there's quite a bit to unpack there, and now what you've got to do is form all or some of that, also in conjunction with any of your own ideas about it, into approximately a one-page response, which is hopefully going to get the 5 marks for you. Okay, so have a go at that for me, and if you want to time yourself for doing this, then I'll tell you how many minutes it should be. So section 1 is 45 minutes. This is worth 5 marks out of 20, so it's worth a quarter of the marks in 45 minutes. A quarter of 45 is 11 minutes and 15 seconds. Okay, if you want to time yourself, 11 minutes and 15 seconds is the time. Okay, good luck. I'll do another video soon. Bye.